Hello learners, welcome to session 4 of Unit 3 in the course Assessment in Maths Education. I am Munkaila Dasmani, your course instructor. In the previous section, we look at the summative and informative forms of assessment, and I'm sure you remember what we said over there. The features, the advantages and disadvantages, and the rest. So in this session, we are discussing another classification of assessment, that is formal and informal assessment. At the end of this session, you should be able to distinguish between formal and informal assessment. Let's start with formal assessment. The formal assessments are those types of assessment that have data which support the conclusions made from the test. So you conduct the test and then you want to make conclusion, then there's a data to support that conclusion. They have specific test administration and scoring procedures, as well as credential or training requirement for test administrators. The test scores may be criterion based, that based on knowledge or ability in a specific mathematics content area, or norm referenced, that is based on a comparison to the sample of the test taker's peers. So typical example is the WAEC WASI. It's based on a laid down procedure, and then those taking the test are trained. So WAEC trained them. The text administrators, WAEC trained them. The external invigilator, internal invigilator, they don't just pick anybody who is in maybe your home that just come and make external invigilator. They make sure that person is having knowledge or is being trained under that. So in some situations, teachers, parents, and administrators might want to know how well students are performing in general. So independent of the specific instructional program. In that instance, the informal assessment cater for that. It answered that. So formal assessment is very important. As I said, WAEC score they put on percentile, so that if this is somebody who had A, it's maybe 80 or 75 or 60. It depends on that marking scheme on that particular year. So advantages of formal assessment. Formal assessment provides concrete, measurable, and objective evidence of learning. So here, in our classroom settings, some formal assessment provide teachers with a systematic way to evaluate how well students are processing or learning in a particular instructional program. And it's actually true, because you conduct exams in your classroom, you see how students are learning. Based on how the results you get, the feedback you get, you can make decision whether students are progressing in learning or they are not. Frequent formal assessment gives meaningful feedback to students and their parents. This is especially important for students who are experiencing learning problems. So when you keep on doing formal assessment frequently, in some schools every week they write exams 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So when they keep on providing those exams, the parents get the reports. It's enable them to know whether their students are learning or not. Also, WAEC exams, and so it's another example. Somebody write form 2, they say go and write an object. They want to see, then final exam write another WASI, then they want to compare. They want to see how learning is progressing. Disadvantages: formal assessment may be stressful, and you agree with me that it's very stressful when it comes to formal assessment. A badly worded question might lead students to misinterpret the program and miss the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge. The people are very good, which they can perform very well, but because of the language barrier, some English vocabulary you use in the setting of the questions, the student will not understand. In that instant, the student cannot demonstrate their score. Teachers might unintentionally allow their personal bias about what they consider important to unfairly determine what part of the material will be included or excluded from the test. This is normally happening to school settings. In a school, a teacher might be asked to set questions for the entire school, Then this teacher, based on his or her interest area, he will set the question in one particular area. And I think it's happened to me when I was in secondary school. They set the question in one particular 2 topics, and meanwhile that semester we did 4 topics, and other 2 topics none came. So when it happened like that, it's very, very bad. So, and that is one of the disadvantages for formal assessment. Informal assessment. Informal assessments are not data driven, but rather content and performance driven. They are sometimes referred to as criterion reference measures or performance based measures. They are used to inform instructions. To use informal assessment effectively, it's better to begin with performance objectives so that teaching could be based on them. So informal assessments is not data driven at all. It's actually based on performance. A typical example would be the assessments that's in group or individual project works, experiment, oral presentation, demonstrations, observations, and interviews. So here is performance based, not write paper and pen, go and write. No, you can demonstrate your skills through oral presentation, or let's say experiment. You can conduct very nice experiment. So it depends on that person's ability. Okay, so that is the informal assessment. So sometimes informal assessment is as simple as stopping during instruction to observe or to discuss with the student how learning is progressing, and that can be also be part. Whilst you're teaching, you can pause. Then ask the question, how is the teaching going on? Sometimes people allow students to write on sheet of paper about their teaching, how are they feeling, is it good or bad, student to assess them. But you can ask the student, how is the teaching going on? It's good. So it's form of informal assessment. And we also have other forms of informal assessment, something like the portfolios, interest inventories. You can talk about work samples, and also personal preferences or preference questionnaires, and a lot. So read more about the informal assessment. For the disadvantages, we have only 2 here. They show student progress over time, and then they involve students in the assessment process. That's advantages. They show student progress over time. They involve students in the assessment process. Imagine you're giving students experiment to conduct. Everybody will take part. You just give to a group or individual one. Everybody will take part. Or maybe you also ask students to work on maybe a portfolio or do a certain presentation, oral presentation. Everybody will do. So it involves everybody, and they also show student progress over time. So that particular time you can realize whether students are progressing or not. Okay, so we see disadvantages of informal assessment. Subjectivity is in the assessment. You see, it's actually subjective. Large amount of time is needed to compile them. If conducted demonstration or experiment, you ask the student to do experiment, everybody has done it, and you need a lot of time to compile this. Unlike formal assessment, you just sit down and mark, and go. But this one, you have to compile them and then you look through. It's actually involving. Informal assessment may lack reliability and validity because there's no criteria that are used to measure, or it's not measured against any standard. It's actually not reliable, and also it's not valid in some instance or some sense. Okay, so that is the disadvantages of informal assessment. Find more in your course material. So in this session, we've looked at formal and informal assessment, and also look at the merits and demerits of each of them. Make sure you go through in your course material and find more in addition. Thank you very much for your time.